You go, girl.
We have great singers. Not only is Nancy with us today, which is a real treat, but her mother is here with us, Barbara. So be sure and get acquainted with her. She's such a delightful person and an hour age group. So, anyway, okay. You want to play this for us once? Because it's not as familiar.
I grew up with this.
It's good. You can sing out.
By the third time, y'all ought to know it.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
We can do it now. So here we learned the word.
You do it again.
And quickly, let me thank all of you for coming. I know that there's not 30 here, but if you will, find yourself a spot at each of the tables back there. And while you're sitting and enjoying each other's company, you have to find out when everyone's birthday is. And then you'll figure out why when we get finished eating. The devotion for the morning comes from Lowell Linden's Through the Stained Glass Window. And October 1st, it says, a recent comic strip of Frank and Ernest was very insightful, as many of them can be. Frank says to Ernest, I don't mind fleeting temptation so long as I can leave a forwarding address. That says a lot about who we are and the fact that we do not always do what is right and best. I wonder how many young people who are now hooked on drugs always wanted to leave a forwarding address. Many times we find out what we need to flee will trap us so that we will never be able to get away. Of course, we would not have so much trouble if the things we should leave behind were not so attractive. But those things, like fantasies and those actions, must be dealt with in a firm manner and given no more encouragement. I often pray this prayer. Dear Father, please fill me with your Holy Spirit. Give me the strength and the courage to do that which I know to be right, so that in all things I may do your will and live to your glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Janet?
Oh, I'm introducing Thea, is that what this is?
Yes.
Or did you want to hear something again?
I don't know about all of you, but I have to tell you, I am excited that Thea is telling us.
Amen.
Well, I was just asked today to do this, and I don't know what to say except Thea is an amazing woman, a generous woman, hates my humor. She says it's junior high humor. But every time she tells a story, it's just fascinating. And so she was gracious enough to offer to do a program here. So without further ado, here is Thea Clark.
First, I appreciate being in this beautiful room. And it's so lovingly decorated. I was surprised when I walked in. It's warm, beautiful. Thank you, whoever is responsible for this. I also want to express my gratitude for this church. It's a beautiful, old, historic church with wonderful vibrations, wonderful leadership, and good and kind people in it. So, before I start my show and tell, I think there's some teachers here, I might recognize that. I want to thank Brian for taking my mishmash of pictures and putting them into a presentation that's viewable.
All right.
I want to thank Janet McBride for taking my mishmash of comments and putting them in readable form so that my daughter-in-law could create a script from them. And I want to thank my daughter-in-law for creating a script. And I want to thank Janet Beach, who gently pushes me into projects and has for over 25 years. To begin, now my only problem is I can't see what Brian's doing.
He's got presentation by Thea Clark.
Pardon?
He's got presentation by Thea
I
Clark.
really should,
Can we turn?
I didn't think of it till this minute, that I really should be on an angle.
Yeah, you can do that.
Fix it.
Yeah, you get at the angle that you want to get at, and we'll do
I
everything.
should be there probably, then I'll be in somebody's way.
No, you want your,
No,
you're lower.
you're fine, sitting.
The other way.
Seated, you won't be a problem.
This will work.
Okay, let's get this around here. You want this in front of you, right?
Yes.
Like that. And then let's do this like this.
I always wondered how rock and rollers kind of eat their microphone when they sing.
It's so the sound goes into the mic.
It's a formidable object.
Yes.
All right. Well, first, number one.
Oh.
Here I am at 6 months in Panama Canal Zone, 1929. I had auburn hair, which I lost later and never regained. Okay, Brian. I love this photo of my mother and father. Probably should have presented it first, but they had just graduated from Worcester Trade Tech at 18.
Wow.
It was their graduation picture. Shortly began World War I, and my father went into the Navy, was sent to England to be on a minesweeper in the English Channel. Next. He was later sent to China. He was 6'1" and 175 pounds. With red hair, he could hide a pack of Camel cigarettes in. Here he is in China, and we thought at one time, not me, other people thought he would bring home a Chinese wife, but he didn't. He came home and proposed to my mother and they were married in 1928, and I came along in 29. Next one. And a few months after this picture was taken, the previous picture, I contracted polio, and a week former polio, and the pediatrician in the Navy's believed in Sister Kenny's method of re-education of the muscles, so I was not put into braces. But I did acquire also malnutrition, and he said I was dying, and unless my mother and I returned to the United States, I would not live. So a small casket was put on the SS Ancona. This is a board ship with 2 other children, I don't remember their names, and made it into New York, where my grandmother and my uncle, a French Canadian from Quebec, met me and the family Lafayette to see these 2 wasted individuals. Next. I forgot to say that when I have to show this because this is 8 Wigwam Avenue, where I grew up. It's 8 Wigwam Avenue, my grandmother's house, as it is today.
Oh, wow.
So I recovered, and I think this is back in Panama. We went back and forth to Panama 5 times, my mother and I. She felt she belonged with her husband, and no matter what, we kept returning. We called this little Chevy coupe Mickey Mouse. There were no seatbelts in those days, so my mother had bought a chair for 25 cents and 80 on the way to New York, and she put that in the front seat, which I promptly fell out of the car one day when the door flew open when she stopped over the This is the little car she drove to the Coca-Cola submarine base where my father, and one time when I was older, there was a scorpion on the ceiling of the car. You know, there are lots of insects in Panama. She drove all the way to the base with that scorpion over her head. My mother was brave. Okay, next one. We lived in Navy housing. We lived in the top floor, all hardwood floors. My father was a sailor. He earned $94 a month at 29 and 30, but it did come in regularly. It was the beginning of the Depression, and we did not starve. We didn't have the hard time that so many others had because that money was there consistently. I had a pet iguana outside. The back had a tree, not a palm tree, a mango tree, I think it was. And this pet iguana would climb up and down the branches, and I would wave at it out the window when I was walking. I was told never to open the window. He was a little scary. You know, iguanas can kill you with their tail. Okay. Next. Now this is my grandmother's house, 8 Wigwam Avenue. I love saying I lived at 8 Wigwam Avenue. They'd say, do you live in a wigwam? And I'd say, no.
What city?
I can find.
What city?
Worcester, Massachusetts. Worcester, Massachusetts. And I was kind of hoping Lorraine would be here today because we were neighbors.
Oh my goodness.
I lived on one side of Lake Quinsigamon, and she lived in Shrewsbury, which was the other side of Lake Quinsigamon. Lake Quinsigamon was an Indian waterway, north and south, up to Canada. Yes, I found arrowheads in the backyard. But I recovered health, and next, this was one side of that. We had a huge property, and my French uncle from Quebec was a great gardener. This was the rose side, and the bench was below the dining room window. And my grandmother, whose name was Edma Tibbets Fawcett Andrews, she was married twice. She was a farm girl. Somehow the richest family, the son of the richest family in town, got hold of her and eventually married her. They had 4 children, but he was an abuser, and in 1905, Edamad went before a judge, showed my mother's abuse, and was granted a divorce. So my Edamad began a boarding house in that house. We had several bedrooms, and she boarded men. Next one. After lunch, sometimes, if I was in the rose garden, which they often just set me down there and I could crawl around on the grass. Oh, that's Edamad. Sorry.
Very elegant lady.
Next one. Yes, that's how she supported herself, was with the, how do you support yourself on a single woman? Yeah, 1905. Oh, yes, there I am. I'm recuperating. And below that window, and that bush in the back is an Althea bush. And she would sit at that window, never idle, always with a crochet hook and thread in her hand, or knitting needles, or felt from a braided rug she was working on. But she was a smoker. She loved Camel cigarettes. She had an apron with a pocket and a grosgrain ribbon attached to a pair of embroidery scissors she carried around. She would smoke half a cigarette, cut off the end that was unused, throw it away, and put the end that was unused back in her pocket for later. She could do anything. She could cook anything, can anything, preserve anything, make wine. She could make a whole room like this filled with great paper flowers for a wedding reception or a teenager's party. I think I got my artistic yearnings and skills from her. Okay. We went back to Panama, and in 1936, I'm going to skip to in Panama on a tricycle with my mother and father. I looked sad because I had just cut off my bangs, and they were not happy with me. I always wore a bow, like Shirley Temple. I always had a bow. Next. This was my Uncle Fred, whom I thought was my father, because he was always there, and my father never was. Freddie came to us when he was 13 years old. He was from a large family in Quebec, and they said, go south and make your way in the world. So he had a cousin with a grocery store a few blocks from where we lived, and the cousin made arrangements with my grandmother with a 13-year-old board, and for his board and room, he would create a garden, and he would do whatever handiwork she needed, and work in the grocery store. When I was 12, or about then, I always get confused between those years because of the war, Japanese attacks, which I remember well on the radio. I rode with him on his pickup truck, which is from the 20s, and it was all metal. It had no upholstery, and I had to put a rug, or a piece of a rug, on the seat in order not to burn my legs in the summertime. And I had to hold on to the handle of the door when we bounced over the ruts on the muddied road around Lake Quinsigamon as he delivered groceries. The family grocery store from Demers, the Frenchman, serviced all the people all the way around, even up to Shrewsbury, for grocery deliveries. And I loved going with him in the summertime because he would sing French children's songs to me and tell me little jokes that an 8 to 10 to 12-year-old could understand. He was probably the kindest man I've ever known. Never a loud word, never a cruel remark about anyone. Just really a loving, loving man. Okay. In World War I, he was a conscientious objector and a medic. Okay, next. That was the grocery store. And that was an earlier picture from the 20s. This one is 1925, I think. Next. In 1936, let's try the next one. My father phoned from San Pedro, California to ask if my mother would join him because he had been recalled to the Navy. He had left the Navy, but he was recalled. So the two of us, my mother and I, and a 36 Ford, without air conditioner, no power brakes, no power steering, hot leather seats, traveled 8 days and 3,528 miles to California. I was a navigator. I was 7 years old.
Oh, wow.
My father, yes, San Pedro is a fishing village of about 20,000. These are old postcards from the Chamber of Commerce. You can see the sailing ships. That's how old this postcard is. And that is Cabrillo Beach, which is in a lot of movies. It's all man-made beach. And when I was 12, I stood on that wooden pier coming out from the boathouse, where the restaurant was and the bathhouse, and saw the spruce goose take off. I saw it fly that 20 feet or whatever. Okay. Next. Warner Brothers Theater is on the right. It's become a historic. It was built in 1928. And for a fundraiser, I'm skipping. I'm not following the script. The building on the left, I'll go back. The building on the left is called Anderson Memorial. When I was 8 and 9 and 10, I practically lived there. I would take the bus from 34th Street, 32nd Street, bus down to 8th Street, and spend the day doing craft work, all kinds of stuff for children at this building that had been dedicated to the community by the Anderson family. I was in folk dancing class there, and one of the girls in the class used to sing. She was a couple of years older than me, and she said, someday I'm going to be singing at the Metropolitan Opera. Her name was Marilyn Dice Niska, and she did. She was also Lady Godiva at the Met, but she did. And for a fundraiser for the building on the right, she returned to San Pedro to sing Madame Butterfly. Oh, wow. I was in the balcony of the theater, and when I heard that one note off stage, that Marilyn, that's Marilyn, beautiful, un bel tears in my eyes. I thought, And we had a lot of people who made good in San Pedro, who did wonderful things. And they became mentors, or they were pivot points of experience in my life. Okay, next. Okay, before this, in between this, when we moved to San Pedro, even then, it was difficult to find a place to rent or live with children. And we couldn't afford to stay at the motor court forever. So my father was in the fleet and would come home every day. We needed a regular place to rent. So my mother filled a bag with books and sandwiches and took me to the local cemetery. And I sat on the steps of the chapel while she left to go house hunting. And at the first house, she was asked if she had any children. And she said, "Oh yes, I have a daughter in the cemetery." We got the place. I had a picture of it, but I didn't find it in time to put in this present. Okay, next. I am out of order. So let's skip to 16. This is the red. Nope, let's go back to the red card.
Keep going, the red car. It's the trolley car.
The trolley car.
Number 16.
The other way.
There.
There.
Who remembers the red card? Anyone throw the red card? My mother was very brave. We had to give up a car during the Second World War. There was no gasoline. And if the tires rotted, there were no tires to buy. So by that time we had bought a Mercury, and it was up on blocks in the garage. We did buy a house for $4,000.
Wow.
This isn't in the script. We were renting a house. The man next to where we were renting said, "I have to move to Hammond for my health. Would you like to buy a house?" My mother said, "I don't know how to buy a house." And he said, "I'll rent it to you with rent going toward purchase."
Wow.
And so he did. And she ended up paying $4,000. And for the next slide, wait a minute. All right, so this, okay, well, the red card, I did want to say, on the red card, we went to Los Angeles lots. We went to lots of places in LA. And we went by the Watts Towers. And I saw Simon Rodia, R-O-D-I-A, climbing the Watts Towers. And building them over a period of 2 years. Because we went off and we almost went every other weekend. And I never knew he would become a legend. That would become a historic art event that engineers have been trying to pull apart, and it was so well built that nobody can ever. It's just a wonderful, wonderful exhibit of a person's perseverance. And he was an immigrant. That's all I'll say about that. All right, on the 17, which is Kirkhoff Avenue, which was my home for 30 years. It was across the street from the largest elementary school, which is on the left in San Pedro. Our house is that little one to the right on the border from the frame on the far right. That's our house. So that I would wait for the bell to ring, and I would run across the street. We had this is in the script, sorry. We had a very innovative principal named Dr. Enfield. She wore mostly purple, and often her outfits had a cape. She was very statuesque, and she believed in creativity. So that every Friday we were given choices. Now I'm 8 years old. We were given choices about what electives we would like to do for that afternoon. I mean, like junior high, like middle school. The school had an auditorium. It was built in 1928, and often those schools had separate auditoriums and wonderful stages. Now the schools, you have to eat outside underneath a canopy and dance on the benches. So I chose voice choir, which we, as a group, we read material in a sing-song fashion to create and learn rhythm and timing and storytelling. And I loved it. I just loved it. From there I went, this is not in script, Jen, I had an elocutions teacher where I was taught to stand properly and gesture. Had a lot of fun memorizing material, and we gave recitals, where we actually recited like the Gettysburg Address and dramatic pieces from Shakespeare. Okay. The house where we lived there was about 4 blocks from the beach. And I spent a lot of time at the beach also in the summers. And at the beach house, in the postcard previous, was a basement filled with marine exhibits and a man who was the docent called Dr. Lloyd. And when I was 14, I volunteered to work in the museum. So what it meant was I swept and washed windows, washed cases, cleaned exhibits. Later, the material in that museum, and I also donated a shell my father brought from overseas with my name on it. Now is a world-class marine exhibit called Cabrillo Marine. It was built in the parking lot. Children from all over Los Angeles come to see the exhibits. Okay, next. I had a girlfriend who lived out near the cliffs on 42nd Street. I lived on 34th. She lived on 42nd. One day, an evacuation notice was posted on her door. They had to move because there was a geological issue. And the issue was 3 streets in San Pedro fell into the ocean.
Yikes.
This was that part.
Sort of like Palos Verdes right now.
And yes, that whole section from San Pedro to Palos Verdes is a geological myth.
Yes.
It's a San Andreas Fault, the Cabrillo Fault. Okay, anyway, this was part of the park that fell in. And later it became Sunken City. And a lot of substance is grown there. A lot of illegal substances grown there now. Very colorful, there are a lot of graffiti. Okay, next. Oh, this is Cabrillo Beach. It's a man-made beach. Well, that's the new museum. Part of the new. There are 3 sections of this beach. This is the ocean side, which is the roughest side. And during storms, this often just disappears. And they have to bring in tons and tons and tons of sand to rebuild it. beyond the pine tree, or palm trees, is the bathhouse. And the movie 50 First Dates, if you've ever seen that, is filmed there. Okay. Next. My folks were determined that I attend college. And I came up to Claremont and interviewed at one of the colleges here when I was 17 and found we just couldn't afford it. So I was accepted at UCLA in 1947. This is my first short haircut in Westwood Village by a man who was a wig maker from the Hollywood industry. He had retired, and he and his wife opened a small shop, and there were pictures of celebrities' children all over. He was a specialist now in cutting children's hair. So I found this little shop, went in, asked if he would cut my hair, and I said, "How much do you charge?" He said, 50 cents. So for 2 years, I had my hair cut for 50 cents. Next. I love that dress. I kept it for 4 years. So my mother made all my clothes. I'm outside a bungalow where I was to teach myself. That's my last roommate. She came to my 90th birthday party 5 years ago. Edith. Anyways, we're standing outside the bungalow where, when in my 5th year, I taught a full professor's program. I had been the assistant to the textile design teacher. And she said, "I'm going to take a sabbatical. I want you to take my place." I was 20. And I said, "Well, you teach apparel for design, and people make things like leather jackets and purses and jerkins and belts, and I don't even sew." She said, "I'll give you all my lesson plans, and you take my class the rest of what's left of it this semester," which I did take. So I learned to help people make clothes to fit themselves individually with all different kinds of, we had 5 different kinds of stitches. I couldn't do it today, but I did help people design their own clothes. And I told them, I said, "I don't know how to sew. I will help you with the design, but I don't know how to sew." And the students said, "Well, Prof," they were all graduate students, "we'll do the work. You just be there, you unlock the room, and just take roll." One of our experiences out next, we're standing where he and I were standing, was another bungalow. It was a concrete bungalow that is, had no windows at all. And somebody said, "You know what bungalow you're next to?" And I said, "No, that's a Cybertron." What was it called? A cyclotron in those days? That split the atom? Anyway, it was some special kind of equipment. And one day I looked out my window as I was standing at my desk, and there were all these men out there in black. And I said, "Who were all those men?" They said, "That's the CIA." I said, "Let's all stay right here." No. And next. Okay. I lived in a studio on my folks' property in back of the main house. And that was their car, which I eventually drove back and forth. That year I taught at UCLA. I love that car. I could get 10 people in it. I mean, if anybody hit me, what was them? It was a tank. Does anyone remember the Hudson?
said, well, yeah.
It is.
I said, you said, that's.
I dearly love that. It had 3 ways, this is not in the script either, sorry. It had 3 ways to drive it. You could drive it completely automatic, had a little switch, completely on the steering column, completely automatic. You could drive it with the clutch pedal and the shift, or you could drive it without the clutch, but the little handle on the steering. I always drove it automatic because I looked, whatever. But anyway, since I was the newest teacher at my school, I was almost given the low man and the total pole jobs. So I was assigned a group of girls who fought with each other. They were not allowed at recess or on lunch on the campus. So they were to go to my room, and I was to monitor them. Well, this is the whole semester this happened. I had a number of these girls, probably about 8. Well, I also got engaged, and I would tell them about that. And I had preparations to get married that year. So I said, if any of you will be good enough to be allowed back on campus, I will let you help me with my wedding. So 4 of them did supply that commission, and I said, I also need you to have formals. So they said, we will have formals. Okay. So these 4 girls, whom the vice principals had punished in various ways, piled into that big old car with me, and we drove the 6 miles around the circle of Palos Verdes Hills to the glass chapel where I was to be married. I was very nervous, and one of the girls had a package of chlorets. Remember those? Well, by the time I drove the 6 miles, I had consumed the whole package. All right, so we got into the chapel, wedding starts. Oh, I had to have 2 ministers also because it was a Swedenborgian chapel, and the minister who was there said, I have to officiate. I said, I want my own minister. So I had 2 ministers there, side by side. So I stood up, my husband and the best man, not to worse for wear after having too many at Marineland before they got to the chapel. And when I was told to say I do, I opened my mouth and my teeth, gums, and tongue were all green. There was a pregnant pause. My husband to be laughed. Thank goodness. Then at the reception was at my folks' home, and I had the 4 girls in their formals serving the principal, the assistant principal, the counselors, all these, and I just looked on with pride.
Yeah, you should.
So there you 2. Anyway, okay. Next. Oh, yeah. Recently the Glass Chapel has been in the news because another big cracks have developed in the sidewalk from the chapel to their offices. They were developing the last time I was there, which was 2 years ago. And my daughter was married there also. And it's become so, when I was married there was no foliage. It was just a glass box sitting on the dirt on a hill looking at the ocean. That was it. Some shrubs are about a foot high. which standing outside waiting for my cue to go in. I missed my cue because I didn't want the wedding march. I wanted Debussy's La Mer. I was artsy, right? And my veil flew off and went down the hill. My mother had made my little coronet, my veil. She made my wedding dress. I lost so much weight, she had to change it 4 times. I went down to a size 8 from a 16. Because my ex-husband was thinner than I was, and I wasn't going to let him be thinner than I was standing at the altar. Okay, anyway, it has now been dismantled, and it is the Palace Fergus Chamber of Commerce is looking for another site because it's such a landmark, and so many people remember with happiness, you know, what good things happened to them. It was such a beautiful spot to be. It was tiny. It was not as big as this room. It held 100 people. That was it, squeezed together. Okay, so that is it. There we are.
Beautiful.
Okay, next I'm going to go back a little. Back and forth. This is China, where I went in 1984. When I was 12, I read Pearl Buck's The Good Earth. And I was appalled at the description of binding girls' feet. I was so affected by it, I never, ever forgot. When I went to China, one of the tours was climbing 384 steps up to a Buddhist temple. Now, before I went to China, I had learned a few phrases. You know, hello, how are you? I'm an American. Where's the restroom? But there were no restrooms, they were pits. Okay, we won't go into that, but that's a different story. So anyway, I climbed up, and on the way, I said to the guide, my little perky Spanish, Chinese, and this little lady standing next to me looked up at me, and he said, he wants to talk to you. And I said, why? Because she knows something about you. And I said, what do you mean? You keep looking at her feet. And yes, she has bound feet. And she wants to tell you that she's okay. It is all right. She has had a good life in spite of it. So this little lady took my hand and walked with me down the 384 steps and down the road to the bus. She wouldn't let go of me. Somebody luckily took this picture of me. I treasure this picture. I didn't know until we got back into the United States that this picture had been taken. But there I am, the elephant, next to this person who probably weighed 70 pounds, wet, whatever.
That's you holding her hand right there on the right?
On the right is this little lady, about 70 years old. She's holding tightly to my hand, and we are going to the bus. And as we got to the bus, and the door was open on the bus driver said, I think she wants to go with you. So I actually hugged her. And I know what closure means. You know what closure means. So that's that story. Next. Okay. Now, for the people who read my book, several people here read, Jan and Gary and Shelley and several, quite more. Yes, Sue, Sylvia, Janet. Well, Janet critiqued it. Patty and Bonnie and Judy and I didn't know you'd read the book.
Yep.
Wow, that's a wow for me.
And the book's in the library.
So, yeah, this is the book Jan and I both, she has 2 books. I got this one out. Took me 10 years. So there were no pictures in the book because the publisher was new, and she said, if you will pay for the cover, we'll put a picture on the cover. So I paid for the cover, and she published the book. So here are some pictures. All right. The first one's of Michael, the young man, the 26-year-old, who died of AIDS, and he's talked about in the book. The other 2 are Lewis, who's still alive and still teaching. So I put some of the inexpensive trophies we were always given. Those are from 1994. I have a bunch of them. Actually, I threw most of them away. But because I shouldn't have thrown one of them, there's a 3rd on there. All the rest are first. I don't know what the 3rd was in. But as you can see, in this far one, somebody in the audience yelled, "Get a room." Oh dear. Well, next slide.
Oh, nice.
So this first line here, this is my Olympics. I learned a little bit of Argentine tango in the 90s, but it was not a competitive offering. I overpaid for this competition in Florida, so my teacher arranged for an Argentine tango heat. The heat is, what you enter. So I scrabbled together a costume of a lace leotard and a cheap skirt we cut up the slot for a slit in the side. And they actually halted the competition 5 minutes for me to go backstage, back on the judges' table, and change from the pink costume to this made-up costume. I was the only one on the floor in this huge ballroom. And for 2 minutes, I was on my mount, the Himalayas or whatever the mountains I might have wanted to climb were just 2 minutes. And of course I got a first, because I competed against myself. Nobody else was on the floor.
Yeah, I started your book and I got chapter 4, I don't know, but tell us how you got started with this though. I mean, there's some of us who
in the
don't know.
beginning?
Yeah, the beginning.
That's the first chapter of the book. You can see how happy. Arthur. I always call him the wrong thing. Arthur said to me at the wine tasting, what I got out of your book was that you really loved what you were doing. And I said, if people get that and they do the same, I was from 60 to 72 when I was doing it. Did I expect when I was 25 to do this? No. Or 35 or 40 or 50. I didn't, because as I say in the book, when you compete, you change, you go to a dressing room with all the other competitors and you strip. So you go, because in those days, the costumes had built-in bodysuits. So you did not wear brassiere or underwear because it was all built into the costume. That pink costume was $2,500. Oh, the blue costume was $3,000 because it had so many Swarovski crystals all over it. And the material itself, who was Cher's designer, Bill? Bob Mackey. I was wearing a Bob Mackey original. We went to this famous fabric store in Hollywood to buy the material for Latin dancing, and the proprietor knew all the dancers. And in this building, in this huge room of fabrics were dancers, Sid Charisse, Fred Astaire, Gerard, portraits of everybody. Anyway, he said, I have 2 yards of a Bob Mackey material. It's brand new. It's crystal embedded. It's $125 a yard. This was 1995. And he said, if you take both yards, I'll give it to you for $75 a yard. So that's what I was wearing in the previous, that one there. I learned when you get dipped, right, you have to trust. That was another thing I learned. Going, how far down am I going?
All the way.
He said, all the way. I love Louis. He was such a kind person, and he created a new life for me, new chapter in my life that I never, ever, ever would have envisioned. I tell my grandchildren, especially the men, tell your granddaughters they're pretty. Tell them that they're smart and they're pretty. My father never said I was pretty. My mother always said I was fat. So dancing, being glamorous, changed all that for me. Suddenly, I looked like a princess. And I loved it. One last slide. Oh, no, that's Louis. That was at my 90th birthday party. Yeah. Okay, next. So this is the finale. My friend Jen is always getting me into stuff. So years ago, she started me coming to Rummage, and now they can't get rid of her. Oh, thank you, that's
Thea, we have a few minutes if there's some questions that we'd like to ask her.
Nancy?
So, how did you actually get the idea to dance? Did you go to a little community college and go, oh, this is fun?
A telemarketing call.
Oh my God.
I described in the beginning, I was sitting with my mother, watching TV, and I get a phone call, and I put it down. Well, this young man who was in the picture called 3 times. He called November, December, and January. And I said, okay, I'll take a half-hour free lesson.
Cold,
Well, I was sucked in immediately. This was tall, sweet, southern, from Texas. He was adorable. Of course he was adorable. I was his meal ticket. I'll talk about that later. But anyway, I love the courtland as he called me Miss Thea, took me by the hand and opened the door for me. And he was just a sweetie. Anyway, so I took the half-hour lesson. And he said, if you're interested in more, give me a call. And I said, oh, I don't think so. But you know, on the ride home, 8 miles from the studio, I thought, I enjoyed that. Here I am, 61 years old, and I enjoyed that. So I called him back when I got home and said, I'll make an appointment for an hour long. Now, I was retired. I had retired early. And I didn't think I could afford it. The lessons were $60 an hour. And he didn't get all that, but that's what they were at that time. And, once done, it's like a potato chip. It's not enough. Taking one lesson a week, then 2 lessons a week. Of course, I could refinance my house. I did. So that was it. It was a telemarketing.
Janet has a question.
Yeah.
You have so many stories that you weren't able to fit in, but what about Marie Callender's? She made flies in a
Oh,
garage.
Marie Callender.
Yeah.
Oh, we lived in Long Beach for 5 years from 1960 in the 60s, before we bought the medical clinic. And when I would drive from the Circle in Long Beach, you know the Circle?
Yes.
We lived on Clark Avenue in Long Beach, and actually it was on Atherton between Clark and the next one. And I would drive to San Pedro over the bridge every day back. And sometimes I would drive down Redondo Avenue to First Street, to Ocean Boulevard. And I went by this house on the left where once in a while there'd be a woman out there with a stand. And I stopped one day to see what she was selling. And she was selling chicken pies. And so I bought one, took it home. And my husband said, "This is the best chicken pie I've ever eaten." Well, history is being made suddenly because she rents a place on Pine Avenue in Long Beach and does only chicken pies. And this is in the 60s. Then we moved back to San Pedro, and then 20, 30 years later, there are Marie Callender's everywhere. She was Marie Callender.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, the White House with the picket fence, was that the $4,000 house you guys bought?
The little white house in the picture with the picket fence in front was at 4,000.
That was the $4,000 house. It was a front house with 2 bedrooms. It had a studio apartment over an area that was large enough for another apartment and a 2-car garage. It was 40 by 60, 40 feet by 60. Yeah. Oh, the fence one time. I don't know if any of you remember Dane. He played a detective.
Dane Clark?
Dane Clark. Dane Clark had a group of people filming near our school. They were filming part of the school. And they stopped and knocked on the door and said, "Could we use your picket fence for the scene?"
Oh.
And my mother said, "I guess so." He said, "We'll pay you $50.
Oh.
$50. So I didn't ask for, I wasn't into autographs or anything. So I said, "I see you on TV." That's about all I could drive. I think I was 14, maybe. 14, whatever.
I think lunch is about ready. On behalf of the auxiliary, I'd like to present you with a
Oh,
gift. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
you're most welcome.
Thea, I have to tell you, my mother also was born in 1929. And her father lived in Massachusetts and came to California. And she lived in Los Angeles a long time. You guys have to talk.
I have a hearing problem. What did you just say about Massachusetts?
My grandfather
Your grandfather?
lived in Massachusetts, grew up there. They traveled to California,
Oh my gosh.
where he met my grandmother and
My
my
gosh,
mom.
what part of Massachusetts?
Springfield? Springfield.
My father was born in Springfield.
Ludlow.
I lived in Marlborough, Westboro, Fall River, Somerset, Worcester. I lived in Worcester. My father, he was in the Navy, he was recruiting often. person at that time and moved around a lot. I love Massachusetts. It's so beautiful.
My dad said that he, in high school back there, he was getting in all the plays. So that started his career of wanting to do local plays in the rest of his life. Until he was 81 or so.
You'll have
Out here in Los Angeles.
You'll have to keep that because I have.
You guys will talk closer.
Okay. Have you been to Gloucester?
Gloucester? That's familiar.
Gloucester's where all the antiques are, where the mariner, the ancient mariners stand. And I've been to Louisa Alcott's home.